what I struggle with, and a lot of other people I think struggle with, is understanding the false flag theory of governments setting up, these so-called terrorist attacks. Why they would do it? Let's take France for instance, because that's already been being talked about that it's already a false flag. One, why would they do it? And two, these people who carry it out, why would they do it knowing that they most probably are going to be killed?
Is that the question?
Yes.
The answer is I've got no idea.
I mean, what is if it was a false flag, France? Who is going to benefit out of that?
Well, I think perhaps the first thing to say is, where this term false flag comes from. Would that be useful?
Yeah.
You probably know. Do you know?
To my knowledge, I think it goes back a bit further, but to my knowledge, it was Pearl Harbor.
No, it goes back much further than that.
Enlighten me.
Well, it comes from the fact that in days of yore, maybe even before the period that I'm talking about, but when the British were ruling the waves from, say, Elizabethan times onwards, obviously there was the Armada and things in the 1588, was it? Something like that. That actually came to these shores, didn't it? And burned Mosul and so on.
Oh, the Spanish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of what you did was you kept a flag of convenience or some other flag flying until you actually got to the point at which you could attack, and then you would put up your own flag. But it was a false flag because it looked as if you were a friend and not an enemy until the point of battle.
Yes.
And so it comes from that, really, from the fact that using false flags, in other words, pretending to be someone other than you are, as a means of attacking an enemy.
Yeah.
And so false flag events are those that are around the world are said to be caused by others when actually it's caused by yourself or by the home country,
But I mean, for people like me that find it hard to believe them, only because they're quite unbelievable.
Yeah.
Most of the times. I mean, 9/11 to me was pretty obviously a false flag. But
well, nobody thought it was a false flag, or very few thought it was a false flag to start with, did they?
yeah,
Everyone
but
thought
the
it was-
events after.
Well, I think it's been proved to be that afterwards, but at the time, everybody was taken in, weren't they?
Well, yeah, but I mean,
Everybody was taken in
an
by
event
the
like
story.
that. Yeah.
In other words, it wasn't a false flag until people started questioning the explanation and showing that nothing actually made sense.
Yes. Yeah.
And then they started saying, well, hang on a minute. If it's not as the government have described it, which is still held to be the correct explanation, even to this day, by the British and American governments, then, it must be something else. And, false flag is the point is with that, the 19 hijackers, so-called, many of whom were later proved to be still alive after crashing into both buildings, is a false flag because it was blamed on the wrong people. That the people, what you have to do, you always have to have, what is called a patsy. You have to be able to blame it on somebody.
Yeah.
And it's highly suspicious that, take for example the Twin Towers jobby, Mr. Obama, not Mr. Obama, Osama bin Laden, sorry. Let's get it right. Oops. Have to cut that bit out. Osama bin Laden was accused within minutes of the thing taking place.
Yeah.
But prior to that, the FBI, subsequently confirmed, had absolutely nothing to connect Osama bin Laden with the Twin Towers. Now that is highly suspicious, isn't it? That a man who stuck thousands and thousands on the other side of the world in a cave could have miraculously, organized the sophisticated attack with planes and people and sort of targetry and explosives and everything from a cave, the other side of the world, when the FBI have subsequently admitted there's nothing connecting him to him. But immediately after the attack, on all the news medias, it was Osama bin Laden. On some of the video you can see of the actual site, they've written, "Osama, we're coming to get you." Somebody had scrawled that on in spray paint.
Right.
And this is when the man isn't connected by the leading criminal investigation organization of the United States.
But yeah, if the powers that be say that he was, then
they had to have someone to blame it on.
Yeah.
And this mysterious man, who was a friend of the Bushes, who'd only just close friend, who'd only just recently been treated in a Kuwaiti hospital for a terminal disease, because the story is that he died at the end of 2001.
Yeah.
He actually died from that condition. It was reported on the media that he died. So in other words, the man that they killed, when they attacked, Islamabad or whatever the name of the place is, which is actually a leading Pakistani military establishment, couldn't have been Osama bin Laden if he died in 2001.
Yeah.
Not from some bombing explanation, but because he was dying of kidney failure, apparently, and that's what he was treated for. Treated by Americans immediately before the attack. Now, this even just that one fact out of all the hundreds of facts points to 9/11 being a false flag. Because how else do you describe it? How else do you explain it? It's inexplicable otherwise. The 19 people, not all of them, even died, and yet they were all meant to be on planes. So that to start with is a major, hole in the story, isn't it? And the man, who supposedly engineered it all, their own criminal investigation organization says he wasn't connected. So how do you get around? That's just the start of it.
But I mean, back to the whole, recent history with Muslims, especially because they seem to be the monsters. At the moment. Everything in my mind can't be all false flags. Are there actual Muslim terrorists that operate, and are willing to walk into a hotel like Mali and just shoot people?
Yeah.
Do they exist, or?
I'm sure they do. I mean, listen, we're speaking on a little island off the coast of Europe, aren't we?
They know where we are now.
Called Great Britain.
Yeah.
But for 30 years, we had people who would go into shops and blow themselves up.
Yeah.
Or blow other people up. Or shoot soldiers.
Yeah.
how many thousand people of our own people were killed by the IRA and the UDA?
Yeah.
That was a common event. And you know, they would stop at nothing. They put bombs in the city of London and blew up, you know, they would blow up a pub or a nightclub, just precisely what has happened in Paris.
Yeah.
Just at the last weekend. In other words, we've lived with this phenomenon for a long time. So there's no doubt that people put aside all their natural, you know, reservations about violence.
Yeah.
Because, you know, in normal conversation and in normal intercourse, people tend to be conciliatory and polite, and you know, would recoil in horror at the thought of slapping someone in the face.
Yeah.
And yet, apparently, people can also, you know, put all that to one side and blow people into 1,000 pieces and leave them with terrible injuries and so on. Now, we don't have to go to Muslims. Those were British people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Educated, you know, in Britain, brought up in Britain, subjected to all the usual sort of cultural influences, the BBC and National Trust and whatever.
I mean, with current times, it's getting more and more that the average person, you know, when someone says terrorist, they instantly think of a Muslim.
Absolutely. Because that, I think, is a totally intentional thing. And I think we have to go back to 9/11 and even before 9/11 to see where that's coming from. You have to sort of, you know, expand the picture a little bit, because historically we're always within a historical context, aren't we?
Yeah.
But the world, the geopolitical situation, it would appear, although from what you were saying about being out in the, you know, in a spaceship and looking back and having this euphoric effect on people and seeing, you've only got to fly to realize that there are that the political borders of the world exist in our heads.
Yeah. Yeah.
They exist nowhere else than in our heads.
Yeah.
From the sky, you can't see a single border. You know,
that's exactly what they said. There are no borders.
Yeah, apart from perhaps the Great Wall of China or some, you know, Hadrian's Wall or something like that. Or even now in Palestine, of course, the Israelis have put up a wall running north to south and dividing a terrible thing. But, you know, in other respects, the landscape just flows from one place to the other. And you look down and you think, well, what the hell is that little patch of land, you know, fighting that little patch of land? You know, over what? You know, this is the effect of just flying, let alone being up in a spaceship, seeing the whole bloody sort of damn thing, you know.
I suppose you've got more chance of flying rather than
you've
being
got more
in a
chance.
spaceship.
More people do fly, but that was the effect on me when I looked down, you know, flying over Europe and so on, and over the Middle East. You know, when I flew over the Middle East, and you look down on this parched, and you think, my God, you know, and this was before Lebanon erupted in the, you know, early 70s and so on, or was it middle 70s or whenever it was. You know, when I was out in Israel that time, Lebanon was the exemplar for a Middle Eastern state. You know, it was in a state of peace and security and what have you. And then within months, the place was a ruin.
Yeah.
And that's how quickly, you know, civilization can disappear. And it can happen here as well as anywhere else. Now, the thing is, in a historical context, you know, I don't know how far we have to go back, but let's just stay in last century now. You know, the First World War and the Second World War. the First World War was a war between aristocracy, really. It was the same family fighting one another,
Yeah.
Victoria, her nephew, and the Tsar and the Austrian emperor. They were all sort of like a family, and it was like a family squabble.
Big squabble.
that resulted in the sacrifice of I don't know how many million young men.
Yeah.
Who were they were idealistic. You've only got to see those early films to see them going off in the trains and things. They didn't come back that way, but they went off in that way, waving the flag. It was jingoism, sort of the empire,
Yeah.
We've got to... So, we had that one. And then, of course, as a result of the Versailles Treaty and so on, and the reparations and making, rubbing salt into the wound, into the German psyche and so on, Hitler was managed to rise up, and then, we have the Second World War. Then again, we've got a German opposition. Prior to that, Russia was by many Europeans regarded as being the example that we should emulate, because it was socialist, and because the Stalin's plan for the nation of industrialization and agricultural reformation and everything, getting rid of the peasants, bringing everybody that, and so the Oxford in the 30s was full of Russian spies. They recruited all the English people, the intelligentsia of the English, because they were idealistic about the idea of having Britain do the same. And to a certain extent, of course, after the war, they voted in Attlee and a socialist, and we had the National Health Service and all these other, sort of nationalized industries and things, which were a sort of weak copy of the Russian model.
Okay.
But during the Second World War, we're in a very funny situation because we're fighting fascist Germany that many of the British aristocracy supported and wanted to have an agreement with.
Yeah.
And Churchill, who's the prime aristocrat, says no, because he was very much into the empire. And so...
Or what was left of it.
Yeah. But,
after the first.
Yeah, but absolutely. But it was a rearguard action with, he didn't want to lose India or anything else. So strangely enough, just as the empire is sort of dying, that vitalizes Churchill to fight Hitler and the fascists. But in that process, Churchill's famous phrase, any enemy of Hitler is any friend, I gotta get this right. Any enemy, any friend of our enemy, I can't get it. But the point is, sorry, I need to sort of like get it ready. But the point is that we were very anti-Russia before the Second World War, but because Russia was against Germany, they had to be our friends. So we then find ourselves in a position of having allied ourselves with Russia. We were sending sort of, armaments and things, over through the Northern Passage and so on to Russia. Stalin, Churchill met up with Stalin on 2 or 3 occasions. Stalin, used to drink heavily into the night and get poor old Churchill up. He could hardly stand. But he had to, because it was like big weighty things. But where are we? We're at the position of of saying that, Russia became our ally. Immediately the war was over, and because Russia had advanced on Germany and taken the brunt of, they took the brunt of the battle, and we stayed back a bit and let them take all the flak,
Intentionally, do you think?
Intentionally, yeah. I mean, we had some balls ups, with bridge too far and all that sort of stuff. I mean, there are interesting connotations with that, with today and what have you with the... Oh, dear. Anyway, there are all sorts of things with that. But anyway, suddenly, Russia's extended its borders, the Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR...
Hugely. Wow.
Hugely, and brought it right up to our doorstep. Then suddenly they become the main enemy. And everything then changes, Suddenly America is focused on this communist threat, and goes absolutely hysterical about the communist threat.
Was it Churchill who came up with Unthinkable?
Unthinkable?
Was it Operation Unthinkable?
Ah, well, I don't know about that.
Oh, well, let's leave that one there, just in case it's not real. But
no, it might be. There's something ringing a bell in my head, but I'm not prepared.
It was the proposal to go to war with Russia and to
that's right.
Rearm what was left of the German army.
Ah, yes.
To fight the Russians.
Yes, because there was a sort of line of thinking that after the war, we should have taken the war then to Russia and pushed them back again.
And rearmed Germany, yeah.
That was on the cards.
Yeah.
It was,
I think it was called Unthinkable.
All right, yeah, and it is ringing a bell in my head. Yeah,
so it's a good name for it.
It is, yeah. Well, obviously I can't think of it.
Out of 10 for Churchill?
Well, generally speaking.
Yeah, the whole everything mashed into one out of 10.
Well, he was an enigma, wasn't he? Because
obviously he's famous for the war, but
yeah, but he's an enigma in the sense that he was. First of all, his father didn't expect him to do anything, do anything special. His father was a very famous, Randolph Churchill, was the leading politician in the late 19th century. And he got syphilis.
Right.
And, a very sad story of he was a great orator in Parliament. He was if I might be wrong on this, but I'm pretty, because, I've not done any, I've not sort of, what's the word?
Yeah.
No, when you sort of brush up your, when you do before an exam.
Revision.
I haven't done any revision. I haven't done any revision. All right, but I think he was the brother of the Duke of Marlborough.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
But I could be wrong, but I think I'm right. So Churchill was the Duke of Marlborough's cousin. So he came. The first Duke of Marlborough was, in Queen Anne's time, was the man who beat the Dutch. He was the most famous general in British history, almost, apart from Wellington.
I didn't know that. I don't know anything apart from about Churchill. His family or anything. So.
Because he was born in not Charterhouse, but the family home, which is I can't remember now, in Oxfordshire. But it might come to me in a minute. But anyway, this is what I mean to say when I need to be, sort of revise. Yeah, so I got things at the fingertips. But anyway, he was born in the big house with his uncle, the Duke, the Duke of Marlborough.
Yeah.
His father was a leading politician, Tory, as far as I know. His father gets syphilis, which was very, very common. One of the features of syphilis is that the child is affected. Oftentimes the wife becomes infertile. There are all sorts of things about, going down through history about syphilis was knocking around everywhere, and nothing really to treat it, apart from mercury, which did more damage than the disease almost.
Yeah.
But it was progressive through lots of stages. There are classical stages of syphilis, and the final one is sort of a mental deterioration. And it was a very sad. He gave a speech in the Commons, and he lost his way. And he couldn't think, a bit like me all the time. But perhaps I've got syphilis. Right. But anyway. So that was, but his father was, and Churchill grew up, having a stammer and feeling inferior and so on. And then he became a liberal, he went to Africa and he was a journalist, and he got his name in the papers because he escaped from the Boers and, all that story, about on the train and everything, jumped off the train and escaped and things. And then he came back and then, simply because of his background, really, you could do things in Parliament. If you had an aristocratic background, there was a fair chance you'd get elected. And
yeah.
And he got elected for a seat up north, I think, in Manchester or somewhere.
See, what I don't get about Churchill, and you might have just answered it, but I think in the First World War, he actually proposed the idea of Gallipoli.
Yeah, he did. He made a big balls up with that.
That was a huge balls up, and
huge balls up.
And I think he did get demoted for that, didn't he?
He did.
But
he gave it. I think it.
I don't see why. I mean, in this day and age, just say if somebody did that now, they would be out of the game entirely. But yet he became.
Well, he went into a
Prime Minister.
He went into a very dark period, before the Second World War. He went to, he retired to Chartwell, which is a house that he bought in Kent, which I've been round and so on. And all he was doing was building walls. He was building garden walls.
His hobby.
And it was his hobby. And I greatly admire him because, I know what it's like to build a wall. And that's all he did. He used to sit and do a bit of painting and a bit of this, but it's a lovely house. I don't know if you've been there, but it's National Trust, and I've been, years ago. Went around. But the strange thing with Churchill, although he came from that background, he was one, before the First World War, he was in Lloyd George's first government from 1906, I think it was, and he introduced sort of old age pensions and, all those reforms in that reforming Parliament, liberal Parliament. He was a liberal. And, that is surprising because, on the other hand, he was a bit of a warmonger.
Yeah, definitely.
But he did have this, reforming zeal and the common touch as well, they introduced lots of financial reforms, in that first Parliament, things like introduced death duties, if I'm not mistaken, and that's when this series that's been on, ITV, everybody's watched it, with the Edwardian House, what's that called,
Don't know, I don't watch TV.
Don't watch it,
No.
oh, right. Well, anyway, everybody else does. But the aristocratic house, these big houses that were everywhere, it's from that period before the First World War that they decline.
Yeah.
And you get lots of them being demolished and so on and so on. Well, that was partly because, from the First World War, you got these socialist ideas coming in, but then, you see, he ballsed up Gallipoli, and then he ballsed up the Norway invasion in the Second World War when he was, Lord of the Admiralty.
Yeah.
He had this ability to make balls ups, but then sort of recover. And, his reputation after the Second World War, of course, remained until his death in about 1965, wasn't it, when he died, I think?
I think so, yeah.
But,
There's a really good video on YouTube of his
funeral
parade and all the cranes.
Oh, the cranes. I
on the
remember
Thames
watching
coming
that
down?
on the television.
They say that was spontaneous as well. That wasn't set up, but I don't know.
I have heard another story about that.
Okay. Don't ruin it for me.
No, all right then.
It was spontaneous.
I was told that they had to be paid to do it.
Really?
Yeah.
They had to pay them.
Yeah, the Port of London went around to all the crane operators and said, they weren't going to do it because they hated him. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of people who hated Churchill, because of various things. But anyway, that's Churchill. We've done Churchill. But the point is of this, what we're talking about is false flag, aren't we, really?
Yeah, but and
so the reason I got onto all this is because of the Second World War and the fact that, NATO was formed as a result of that, which tied in all the remaining, so that if anybody invaded any of the NATO countries, they were all committed
to protecting each other.
And that still exists.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, at the moment, Francis Hollande, is that his name? I think that's
French.
Is it France? It is France. Francois Hollande has said that he's now at war with ISIS.
Yeah.
Now, the technical effect of that should be that the whole of NATO is at war. If France has been attacked by a foreign entity, then the whole of NATO is committed to fighting that entity.
Yeah.
The only problem is that ISIS, and they're now calling them Daesh, aren't they? Or Daesh, I don't know how you pronounce it.
I hadn't heard that one.
Is not a country in any recognised sense. It's not in the United Nations. It's not got borders. It's not got...
No, yeah.
But it claims to be. But everyone's talking as if it is a sort of quasi-nation.
Yeah.
And those words of Hollande are not just accidental. They're prepared. They are saying that France is at war, and it's justified bombing a sovereign state without declaring war. In other words, that's a war crime. If you're going to go to war, the two parties have to say, yeah, we're declaring war, and they're at war with one another. But if you bomb countries without declaring war, then you're invading them and you're breaking the Geneva Convention.
But technically...
It's against the United Nations Charter to invade another country unless you're doing it to protect yourself. Now then, this comes back to your initial question. Why? Because there would be no justification in bombing Syria unless you could make a case that you were under attack yourself.
But also, I thought of earlier, why France? And who says France haven't been bombing them already?
Well, they have. I mean, they've been not only bombing them, but they've also been arming ISIS. This is, in 2012, it's been proved that France was sending armaments contrary to the international agreement to Al-Nusra. Al-Nusra is part of, it's indistinguishable from ISIS. So these terms are knocked around because the whole scenario is created by the West.
Yeah.
That would be my suggestion. It's an Israel focused policy to destabilize anybody in the region that might pose a threat to Israel. And the reason we do that is because Israel is important to American policy. America sees itself through this little tiny country in the Middle East as absolutely essential to keep going.
Relieve Israel for another time.
Yeah, leave that out.
But my final question is people that just are interested in this subject and have just listened to all this, or just anybody, the average Joe, what do they do? What are they supposed to do?
Well,
if they come to terms that, yes, they believe that their country has been arming the very people that are now attacking them, or that their own government is attacking themselves, what do they? What are they supposed to do?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know that individuals can do very much, really, but I do think that people must resist the temptation to be carried away on a tsunami of propaganda and hysteria. You know, that's the first thing we can do. The first thing we can do is to keep a cool head and actually submit everything that is coming out of government to sort of an objective analysis, you know, so that we aren't just sheep being herded along, you know, to do the government's bidding.
Yeah.
But we say, hang on a minute, you know, are we going to start bombing people? Is there justification for bombing people? Are these attacks genuine, or are they just to get us in the frame of mind that we got to attack something again? And, you know, if enough people in the country get wise to the machinations, because it affects not only what we do abroad, it is affecting directly government policy on repression.
Yeah.
Repression has actually been specified by that minister in Belgium. We need to have more repression. He actually used the words.
Yeah. But you've made me think of a final question now.
Yeah.
Do you think the government or governments have carried on, or maybe even upped their wars or bombings in other countries thanks to the people not I'll use the word uprising or complaining as a weaker word, but do you think that's got anything to do with?
They are very sensitive to what the public mood is. Remember, 2 or 3 years ago, the government wanted to bomb Syria then, and there wasn't the support in the country, and it fell in Parliament. You know, he backed down. He changed. So that had a practical effect. Now, since we've had lots more of these terrorist things, there's lots more propaganda. There's stories about people, you know, jihadists lurking in the community, about any number of plots that have been foiled, although we don't hear what they are, that they've gone to Syria and then come back again. All the time, if you watch the BBC News, it's the same message, pumped out, pumped out, pumped out. At the same time, the politicians follow a despicable sort of line. Oh, we aren't against Muslims, you know, it's only these perverted Muslims. But every time they say something about, you know, it's Muslim.
Yeah.
And so they are pretending not to be, you know, anti-Muslim, but they are.
Yeah.
Because they never say it about Jews. You know, you never hear about Jewish terrorists or Jewish criminals or Jewish, you know, violence against people and torture and bombing, you know, bombing civilians, targeting. I know we're leaving Israel to one side, but in that whole, you know, last night's Question Time,
Yeah.
Israel wasn't mentioned once. But the number of times that Muslim was mentioned, associated with terrorism,
Yeah.
even when they were saying, "Oh yeah, but most Muslims are against," it's still twisting the two concepts together, so that for the most people in the country, this idea that it's Muslims that are inherently violent and want to come and cut our throats and cut our heads off, leaving aside the fact that the propaganda about cutting heads off, where have we had cutting heads off since those incidents with those Jihad John?
Yeah.
And then just recently, very conveniently, Jihad John, what's happened to him?
Oh,
We
been
blew him up.
assassinated.
We blew him up.
Yeah.
So he's out of the way now again. But just for that little period, those videos appeared. This is not genuine, is it? It's you know, you can spot it a mile off.
Well, there never be any proof of that anyway. Jihadi John. But...
Well, apart from the fact that it's Jihadi John, not one shot on those videos showed any indication of chopping heads off.
Oh yes, yeah.
The man stood,
yeah.
and the bloke sat or kneeled, and then later on you saw a body with a head.
Yeah,
Now,
and I think the most graphic one, I think I watched something that from a video professional that said it was doctored anyway.
well, the whole thing, you know, but why haven't we seen that since?
Yeah.
Why aren't they coming on every week? Why aren't they chopping heads off all the week? That was designed to have an impact, and it worked. And the whole world suddenly, you know, turned around and said, "Oh, we got to do something about these terrible." Now, these things are all, you know, designed to have a psychological effect. What we haven't talked about the real reason why it underpins all this. The economic reasons underpin the whole thing. That's, you know, it's a matter of money and oil and
it's always...
natural, you know. So that and the dollar, you know, it's all to do with that. But that is at another level.
Yeah.
So anyway, there we go.
And before we stop, what was it?
What? I don't know. What was it?
Our enemies.
Oh no! Don't do that.
I thought I had it earlier, but I forgot.
Our enemy's enemy is our friend, isn't it? Our enemy's enemy is our friend.
Yeah.
That's it. Our enemy's enemy is our friend. I think that's it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Over and out.